Welcome everybody to the CIWEM Understanding and Using the New National Flood Risk Assessment webinar. My name is Selina Peters and I am the member of the Rivers and Coastal Group Committee in CIWEM, one of the communities. And by day, I'm the Programme Executive for the Environment Agency's Flood Hydrology Improvements Programme. So before we get on to the main body of the webinar, I'll just like to go through a little bit of housekeeping first. Next slide, please, Ben. So as you'll have heard, this webinar is going to be recorded. We only put on the recordings, publish those recordings on our CIWEM website and our YouTube channel when the authors and speakers have given us permission to do so, and as long as there aren't any copyright issues. So we're hoping that this will be fine. We've got permission and I don't believe there are any copyright issues, so we will be posting this one later. And you can look at the past digital copies of webinars on the link there. If you get any technical issues with accessing or anything that's happening in the Zoom, please can you raise your hand and use the chat feature, and then Barbara can help you with those. But if you would like to ask a question about the webinar itself, please can you put your questions in the Q&A facility? So that should be activated for everyone. You should can see it at the bottom of your screen. And make sure when you're asking your question that you include who it's to. You can also upvote an existing question, and we're going to answer questions at the end of the presentation to make sure that we can get through it all. Please try and avoid or don't use the chat for questions. Keep that just to the technical issues. You can use this obviously as an hour's CPD, but we don't provide any CPD certificates for this one. So a little more about CIWEM. Who are we? Hopefully all of you will know, Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management. And our mission is to improve water and environmental management for the public. And as you know, we're a community of practitioners and visionaries, and we have a presence and an activity across the whole world. And I really love this map because it really shows quite how extensive we are and where we have different branches and members. We've got over 11,000 members now. Across 89 nations, which I think is brilliant. I'll talk a little bit then about the Rivers and Coastal Group as well. So that's the group that I'm a committee member of, and we're hosting this webinar today. And our aim is to improve understanding and sustainable management of rivers and coastal environments. And that's not just around flooding, that's wider than that. And we'd like to do more sort of non-flooding events in the future as well. And we do this through a variety of different ways. You can see them on the screen there. And we're always looking for more people, so do please join us. We'd love you to join us. On the right there, I've just listed the annual activities. So we have a calendar of activities through the year, but every year we have a study day that takes place, and our study day this year is actually in just under a month, and we're going to Havant Thicket Reservoir. Which is going to be a great day, learning loads about how they've put together the proposals and the plans for the reservoir, the first reservoir in over 30 years, I believe. And then we'll be taking a walk around the reservoir space itself. Then each year, at the beginning of the year, we hold a technical conference. The one we held this year was in March, and it had a theme of uncertainty and bringing policy into practice. It was really well attended. It was a great one, so we're planning to do that every year. And we also have a couple of competitions and prizes that we do each year. We have the Jack Lewin Prize, where you can nominate anyone who's had a significant impact on the rivers and coastal management environment. And that the winner gets presented with the Jack Lewin Prize in Flood and Coast each year. And then new to our annual round is the Early Careers Challenge, and that kicked off this year in April and was awarded in July, where teams of early professionals storyboarded and brought together a podcast, and then the idea is that podcast will then be broadcast through the Planet Possible series. So we would love for you to keep an eye out for those kinds of events, more links on that page for the future, and also very interested if you would like to join our committee. We have 4 meetings a year, hybrid, mixed in person and virtual, depending on where we are in the country. It's a little picture down there at the right to show that. Okay, you can book the study day now, so there is the link, and here are some other events that CIWEM have got coming up that are open for booking now, just drawing your attention to the fact that these are sort of the series of conferences, if you like, and there's quite a lot going on in various parts of the country, so I encourage you all to have a look at the CIWEM events page. Right, with no further ado then, I'd like to introduce you to Ben Lukey, who is the project executive for the National Flood Risk Assessment, the new National Flood Risk Assessment, and he is going to be chairing most of the rest of the webinar. Remember, please ask your questions in the Q&A and we'll have a look at those at the end. Thanks very much. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Selena, and thanks to CIWEM for providing a space for us to come and share understanding and using the National Flood Risk Assessment, which we often abbreviate to NaFRA. So forgive us if we use that acronym. It's about our National Flood Risk Assessment. So I'll start, and you'll hear from a few other speakers as we go through. Broadly, what we're going to do, I'll give an introduction. We'll hear about the new national modelling component of our new flood risk assessment, and then we'll hear about local model use. So the key thing about NaFRA2 is it combines the national and the local models. So we'll start with those 2 segments, and then we'll have a bit of a technical primer. I know the audience will be quite varied. There'll be some amongst you who have got appetite for detail. So Dave will tell us a little bit about the data that we've published and how it's been created. And then Joe Clark from Jacobs, who's been a key technical lead on the delivery of the project, will do a little reflection on the opportunities that the project has brought, before we finish off with a reflection on what it can and should be used for from Rebecca. And then we'll have Q&A. So that's our plan. So my overview starts with just a reflection on what makes the National Flood Risk Assessment, our new National Flood Risk Assessment, better than what we've had before. So broadly speaking, it's new modelling techniques, more up-to-date local modelling data. We've got a whole load of additional topographical data. We've got computing power we never used to be able to have. So all of that provides the ability to do more sophisticated modelling and mapping than we've had before. Importantly for us, as it says, they're easier to update the flood risk information. We've got a tool. It's not just been a one-off update to our national mapping, but we have a system now which we can use to regularly update our flood mapping using the ever increasing and improving range of local model information and asset information that tells us how good our flood defence assets are at protecting the land behind areas that are defended. And then finally, we've produced a richer range of information than we've ever had before, most notably flood depth information that we hadn't previously published, because it's now good enough to do that at a national level. And importantly, in addition to present day flood risk, we also share projections about what risk may look like in the future. So I'm hoping that many of you will have had a look at the new National Flood Risk Assessment report that we published just before Christmas last year. When you do so, you'll see some of these statistics. So 6.3 million properties at risk now, a higher number than we previously assessments had suggested, and a way of quantifying what we think that might look like in the mid-century under climate change scenario. So really significant picture of what happens across England. We've got, as in previous iterations of our National Flood Risk Assessment, a separate assessment of flood risk from rivers and the sea and from surface water. And you'll see quite substantial increases in the number of properties in areas of high risk, and particularly pick out that surface water change. And that's partly because of the improved ways in which we're presenting the surface water mapping information. So it's more helpful at showing how that may impact properties. And as a result, we've got an assessment which has got a really eye-catching large number of properties at high risk of surface water, although the depths are often not that great. And that is what the next slide talks about. So we've got information on flood depths that we haven't previously published. So you can start to see that the profile of risk for rivers tends to be higher depths, and for surface water tends to be lower depths, and you can start to pick out and use some of that information that we've presented and made available online. Jake, over to you to talk about the national modelling.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Go on. So before we talk about what the new national model is, it's important to explain why we needed it. The new national model is one part of the larger whole of the NaFRA2 system. And for some reason, it hasn't brought up the boxes, so can you just click, Ben? There we go. So the previous NaFRA was fairly limited in what outputs were produced. It would show fairly basic outlines. The national model that existed was in some places 50-meter resolution, and it was limited by the technology of the time, as it were. In NaFRA2, we can create much more complex and detailed products, but also, as Ben's alluded to, there is a system in the background that can answer a myriad of questions, and more detail on that will come later. That means a more detailed and more complex national model is required, and that's why we created the new national model with higher resolutions, more varied outputs, so that we could provide data into NaFRA2. And that's a really key thing to remember about the NNM. It's easy to think of the new national model as NaFRA2, but it's not. It's an input into the system, a very key input, but it is an input, and we created it with that in mind. So this slide just demonstrates how that might work geographically. So the last slide is talking about different scenarios. This slide is talking about geographic infilling. So you might need the new national model to fill gaps in scenarios, i.e. we don't have enough return periods, or we don't have certain outputs we need. On the other hand, we aren't going to have local modelling everywhere, and so we will need a national model to fill in gaps where we have no other information. And this demonstrates that. Again, it'll be explained in a lot more detail later. So how is the NNM an improvement? Well, it's a higher resolution data set, specifically when you talk about fluvial and coastal. It's got improved representation of assets, improved hydrology, improved, well, nearly everything, especially when you think about some of the 50-meter resolution national modelling we had from the original NaFRA. But even for our surface water modelling, which on paper looks fairly similar, you know, the previous model was a JFlow model that was 2-meter resolution. This one is a JFlow model that's 2-meter resolution. There's still significant improvements, and I'll come into some of that detail later. But you can see here a high-level overview of the improvements. I want to move on, Ben. Thanks. So to get into surface water in particular, as I said before, the NNM feeds into the system. So everything we generated was with that in mind. We've done things like updated hydrology. We've used FEH13 because that was what was available when we were doing the modelling, but the system has the ability to, in future, upgrade that to FEH22 if we need to. We've done a range of scenarios, not generated specifically to match what we might use in our products, but generated to allow the system to interpolate and generate outputs as effectively as possible. So again, we ran the NNM with the system in mind, and that was a key thing whilst we were going through blueprinting with our supplier, JVA. We have better asset representation, better building representation, and something that we haven't used yet, but we plan to use in future, which is an undrained version of the NNM surface water. So we did things like draining urban areas effectively to try and simulate the drainage of just land drains, you know. And we've removed that. For fluvial modelling, the improvement is a lot more stark. Again, same thing where we've improved our representation of linear assets. We've added things like failure, asset failure simulations, blockage simulations, breach simulations, and we've modelled down to smaller catchment sizes in terms of where our reaches go to than we ever have in the past. We've also had some bespoke approaches to how we undertake our modelling in certain situations. So even though it's a national model, we aimed to have a consistent quality level, and that was something that we've achieved in some places, less so in others. It is still a national model, but it's a significant improvement overall over previous national models and some of our older local models even, and you can see that example on the right of the screen. If you just click on there, flick through to some larger return periods and then the next slide. So lastly, on a very quick whistle-stop tour, is the coastal modelling. This is a big step forward, especially over previous national coastal models. We did 1D, 2D joint probability modelling in 138 estuaries, or I should say JVA, our supplier, did. That's joint probability modelling as well, looking at fluvial and coastal, with improved underlying fluvial hydrology and using the National Tidal Loading project, which was a sort of sub-project to NaFRA2 to improve inputs, and an updated State of the Nation dataset with, as we discussed before, better explicit asset representation, which applies to all of our sources modelling, as well as primary and secondary asset failure. So we talked about breach modelling, but we've also got failure of tidal barriers and for fluvial FSAs. So we've got a really huge suite of output that then feeds into both the flood zones, but more prominently the risk of flooding from rivers and sea with that probabilistic element. So that's a very quick overview of the national model. I'll let Jonathan Kaplan take over for local models.
Thanks a lot, Jake. Good afternoon, everybody. So yes, local model use. One of the key objectives of NaFRA2 is to maximise the use of our local models. So we'll just have a quick run through what we mean by local models, in case that's not something you're aware of. So as opposed to the new national modelling that Jake was just explaining about, local models, they represent more sort of individual watercourse or catchment scale as well. So they're very detailed. There's opportunity to take in a lot more information about the local environment and incorporate those into those models. They also cover that wide range of flood sources that align with the new national modelling, so fluvial, tidal, surface water, and coastal as well. And of course, we also have local models that combine one or more of those flood sources too. These local models, they are commissioned by, or either commissioned by the Environment Agency. So we produce models to support flood defence schemes or to improve our flood mapping, or they are shared with us by third parties, such as lead local flood authorities, or sometimes developers who have submitted models as part of their flood risk assessments. So we take on models from all sources, and yes, we obtain permission to utilise these in our mapping systems and products. It's also just worth pointing out NaFRA2 doesn't directly use the model files themselves, but instead it uses the results from the various model runs, and we take that information and we process those into a standard sort of data structure and data format. So everything can go into map edit seamlessly. And yeah, when we think about what actual data we do require for use in NaFRA2, the key items are gridded data, particularly depth grids, but we can take on sort of velocity, flow grids, hazard grids, etc. as well. Some sort of domain or mask. So this defines the area that was modelled, and it gives the opportunity for sort of that data, for area teams to clip out parts of that model that they are potentially have less confidence in. So there's an element of flexibility there. And yeah, metadata about the model itself and about each scenario that those grids represent. So which return period, what's really climate change allowances applied, and so on. We have thousands of models that we can potentially use, but after we've sort of filtered out those that don't have that required data, we do have a model selection process that is built into the NaFRA2 system. So each model is pre-assessed for its quality. So we look at our Environment Agency modelling standards, and there's an assessment there to see sort of what the quality of that model is and the condition as well. So we look at how up to date the model is. Have there been any changes, for example, to the floodplain since the modelling took place? Has there been a major flood event that might sort of affect our understanding of the local hydrology and so on? And those scores, they're incorporated into those into the model metadata, so it's available to the NaFRA2 system. And yeah, NaFRA2 uses that information first of all to filter out those models that don't meet a minimum threshold for its use. So if the model is poor or very poor, then that gets excluded straight away. But yeah, in every location we have a local model. There's always the national model available as well, and potentially other local models. So we compare those modelling scores. We look at the age of the model as well, and from that we can select for that given location the best available model for NaFRA2 to use. Sorry, Ben. Yeah. Yeah, once we've selected the local model to use, then depending on the particular NaFRA2 data set that's being produced, there's a query that defines the various parameters, and then that gets used to look up that equivalent scenario from the model metadata, and from that we can identify the model grids that are available, and then can be used to generate the NaFRA2 outputs. And as I said before, that's limited to the area of the domain or mask as well. NaFRA2 has some sort of clever functionality built into it as well. So where there are gaps in the grids, the NaFRA2 system has this event to grid conversion process. And so subject to the availability of the required data for that, it can fill in those gaps and ensure that local model is utilised as well. And likewise, there can be some complexity at tributaries. So we have another polygon data set called the merge max zones, and that allows us to define locations where NaFRA2 can pull through data from multiple models, including the new national model. Those last two aspects are applicable only to rivers and sea models as well. And just to finish off, I'm kind of the data lead for the project, so I just want to explain that it's not just modelling data that gets used in the production of NaFRA2 outputs. There's a range, there's several dozen other sort of data sets that get fed in. So we have lots of boundaries for the purpose of reporting. We take on asset data to help with sort of calculating the chance of failure of a given asset. And we have lots of information about receptors, which allows us to report on the impacts of flooding as well. Over to you, Dave.
Right, thanks, Jonathan. So you've heard about the new national modelling from Jake and about local models from Jonathan. I'm going to talk a bit about how bringing these together, which is the power of NaFRA2 system, and using them to make our published products. So local models don't exist everywhere, and where they do, they don't exist for all scenarios. Some locations may have multiple local models. So NaFRA2 has to select the best available data for the required scenarios based on the rules that Jonathan has talked about, and process it and create the outputs for the relevant extents, which could be answered to a local query, or it could be creating a data set for all of England, such as our published national flood risk products. So for some queries and products, NaFRA2 uses other data, such as asset data or recorded flood outlines. So NaFRA2 software, it is an internal Environment Agency bit of software, but it takes the local models and the new national model to create our published products. So it draws on the same store of data to produce different products and answer different queries. by selecting and processing outputs from local models, which will have different scenarios and different spatial extents, and from the new national model, NaFRA2 can create a standard set of outputs covering all of England with consistent scenarios and outputs presented. So these are the flood zones. So a data set that shows where could flood without the presence of flood defences, which is used in the spatial planning process. So the risk of flooding from rivers and sea, a probabilistic data set showing risk as high, medium, low, or very low, accounting for the presence and condition of defences on a 2-metre grid. And this is a key tool to help us communicate flood risk with our partners and the public. Likewise, the risk of flooding from surface water shows surface water risk at high, medium, low, also on that 2-metre grid, and uses local models shared by partners in LLFAs, and again, a key communication tool. So if we can move on, please, Ben. Thank you. So NaFRA2 stores and catalogues model outputs across a range of flood sources, magnitude events, scenarios, so defended or undefended, different climate change aspects as well. So Joe Clark's going to talk a bit later in this presentation about how the data is catalogued and stored. But this cataloguing, along with the other NaFRA2 tools, allows us to create a wider range of outputs, including these national products. So NaFRA2 needs to extract the right scenarios and be able to stitch them together from all the data in its stores. So this slide is trying to illustrate how different outputs, maybe the flood zones and the risk of flooding from river and sea, NaFRA2 can look to the same model output data, take different combinations of these outputs from river and sea models to process these to create the outputs. So it needs to look for the different flood sources, so rivers and sea, different range of scenarios. So we're making the flood zones, we want the defended and the undefended data. But when we're looking at risk of flooding from rivers and sea, we want to bring the breach data in as well. We need to bring in different AEPs and climate change scenarios, which are different between the different products due to the different use cases they have. And then where relevant, we need to bring other relevant data sets, such as the recorded flood data for the flood zones. There's a similar concept for risk of flooding from surface water, but that's only looking through the surface water outputs instead. And I'll mention a bit how these products are made shortly. So if we can move on, please. So as well as the cataloguing by the different sort of scenarios, there's also a spatial element to this, as has been mentioned earlier. So Jonathan's spoken about a model extent mask, and this is a spatial data set which shows where a model can be used. So this slide is showing how you can get multiple local models in a location. This one's on the Thames and tributary with the Hogs Mill. So there's different models for the different watercourses here, as well as the new national model. So the model extent mask data set is showing where a local model can be used. And also we have merged max zones, which show where multiple models can be used in one location, maybe where there's a confluence where all models are relevant. I'll talk about what's published later, but worth noting for risk of flooding from surface water, we've just published a model origin layer, which shows a user where the national model has been used and where the local models have been used to help interpret the product. So if we could step on, please. So I've mentioned that NaFRA2 looks through its catalogue of models to return results for specific queries, and just replicate that in the top right of this slide. But what happens when there isn't a if there isn't a relevant model output in the catalogue for this location? NaFRA2 does have access to other tools, such as interpolation. So this uses depth grid information, and it interpolates linearly between each known grid cell value to provide information for unknown scenarios, maybe a different magnitude flood event. There will be more uncertainty associated with these, but the quality of interpolation improves with the more model scenarios that are available. It does allow us to infill gaps and create new information and create standard products across the whole country. Particularly important for climate change scenarios. So we've got an animation which shows what was produced when NaFRA2 was asked to interpolate a 1 in 50. All it was given was 1 in 5 and a 1 in 200 event from a local model, which is quite an extreme range, as most models will have more. The animation then shows what the 1 in 50 output was from that local model, and in most places it's a good match. So we've now extracted the scenarios we want from the local models. We can move on, please, Ben, sorry, and the new national model, and we've used the tools such as the interpolation, etc. Now we need to build the products. So I'm going to focus on the flood zones and the risk of flooding from rivers and sea, as they're two different ways of using the same data, but similar processes are used across surface water outputs as well. So for the flood zones, the system has a set of defined rules to extract the right data. And for the flood zones, it's a case of adding all of these together to get the right extent. So we use the undefended data, we use the defended data, and we use the recorded flood outlines as well in flood zone 2. And you can see how these are laid on top of each other to create the final output. So there are attributes in the flood zone layers which show sort of how the data was built up, which of these sources the information has come from. So I'll move on to risk of flooding from rivers and the sea now, which is a probabilistic product. It accounts for the presence and condition of flood risk management assets and the chance of them overtopping or failing. So rather than being a single model output from a deterministic model, it considers the chances of the overtopping or failing and brings these together into a single result for each sort of grid cell, so be that high, medium, low, or very low. You can see from the slide how it starts to build up the risk picture from the defended outputs, the undefended outputs, but also those failure scenarios. The defended outputs assume everything's working as intended, but there is a residual risk element there from the asset failing. So it needs to know what would happen if an asset fails, but also we need to understand the probability of this happening. So there are calculations use information about the assets, so the crest level, the condition grade, and these are combined with the water level loadings sort of from the channel or from the sea, and uses a fragility curve, which tells us the chance of failing given a loading on that asset. So it's a similar concept used in previous versions of risk of flooding from rivers and sea, but there is a new aspect to this, which is primary assets. So these are large tidal barriers and flood storage areas, which in turn will also affect the loading on other assets. So if a primary asset would fail, then the loading on the other assets would also change, which in turn are used in the calculations. So the next slide looks at this a bit visually, in a spatial manner. So you can look at a point in the floodplain, and it will take the defended and the undefended scenarios, but also would account for all the asset breaches which could influence risk in that area. There's also a primary asset in this example, and this sort of adds another set of results on the right in green. So all of these system states have a probability associated with them, and the NaFRA2 sort of software combines all of these into a single result for each 2 meter grid set, be that sort of high, medium, low, or very low. It can do that for the chance of flooding, so i.e. sort of a very shallow flood, but it can also do this for the chance of different flood depths being exceeded. And we publish those for across risk of flooding from rivers and sea and risk of flooding from surface water. So NaFRA2 has allowed us to improve the products that we publish. Jake's talked a bit about the quality improvements for the new national model, but there are other ways as well. So we've been able to produce a wider range of outputs, even where we don't have those local models. Some of the resolution of the products has improved. The risk of flooding from rivers and sea was 50 meters. We've been able to produce that on a 2 meter grid now. And on the right there, we've been able to include climate change outputs in our products for the first time. And these vary per product, depending on the use case. But the system also has flexibility to allow us to update those to different climate change scenarios in future if the guidance were to change. And finally, from me, I'm just going to talk about a summary of how the data sets we've published. So these are the same products that we've had before. Like I said, risk of flooding from rivers and sea, risk of flooding from surface water and the flood zones, but the improvements that I mentioned allow us to publish more outputs from these products. So in January this year, on Check Your Long-Term Flood Risk, we published updated maps and information from risk of flooding from rivers and sea and surface water. That includes the new risk of flooding from the sea data, the new risk of flooding from surface water data, and they're also accompanied by climate change scenarios and with depth of flooding data, which is new for rivers and sea. And that exists for both present day and for climate change. And Check Your Long-Term Flood Risk is our sort of primary communication tool for many of our partners and the public. So in March, we published new flood risk information on the flood map for planning. So the main use of this is the spatial planning service processes. In August, we have changed some of the layers available slightly on the basis of user feedback. The layers that were available there, some of the flood extents for individuals or defended or undefended scenarios, they're still available on the NaFRA Data Services platform, but we've simplified what's shown on the flood map for planning. And now it's sort of flood zone data and an extent that includes an allowance for climate change, along with a surface water output. So all of this data is available on the NaFRA Data Services platform for people to download or use as data feeds. Just say that these were the initial releases of the products from NaFRA2, and we'll be updating these over time. So the first update from the risk of flooding from surface water was yesterday, and this was updated with some new local models from LLFAs included in this, and that's now on Chitty long-term flood risk and the DSP. At the same time, we've also included some hazard and speed data for surface water, which weren't included in the January release. So updates from these other data sets will follow as sort of new data works its way through these processes. And I think I'm now handing over to Joe to talk a bit about some of those processes a bit more.
Thanks, Dave. So, I mean, we've had lots of amazing stuff about the technical backgrounds in NaFRA2. So I thought I'd come at it from a slightly different angle and talk about innovation. And for me, there are two distinct flavors of innovation in the context of NaFRA2. Firstly, there's the innovation that's made NaFRA2 possible. And secondly, the innovation across the industry that we hope NaFRA2 will unlock. And for me, NaFRA2 has been a fascinating project to be part of, because throughout its more than 5 years of development, it's felt like the constant innovation of an applied research and development project that also at the end of it needs to work towards a real usable cloud computing system that meets all the requirements of a government IT project. And looking back, there are so many different innovative facets of NaFRA2 I could talk about, but I thought I'd just highlight a couple that really bring to life the challenges and complexity, but also the skills needed to solve them. So one of the, as we've talked about a little bit, one of the fundamental principles of NaFRA2 is making best use of the extensive catalogue of local flood models. But we need to couple that with being able to produce a really wide range of scenarios and outputs that those models don't necessarily cover. So to solve that challenge, rather than cataloguing simulations based on their annual exceedance probability or return period, we decouple them from their driving event and instead catalogue them based on their physical hydrological characteristics. And then we combine that with a library of national indexing values that gives us our best current understanding of what we expect those physical characteristics to be for a range of scenarios. So all of that introduction about interpolation that Dave just gave us, that interpolation is made possible through this indexing approach. And what means we can use simulation outputs to represent more than just the event that they were originally designed for, including a wide range of climate scenarios and epochs, as well as the different primary asset states that Dave talked about. But as Jake mentioned earlier in the NNM section, it also unlocks that possibility for future changes in our understanding of either present day or climate change to be brought straight into the analysis without having to chuck away that amazing library of data. And what's I think most impressive is that most of these calculations and decisions are actually applied at the individual 2-meter grid cell level. But with so much overlapping data coming from different models, we've already talked about kind of the rules applied to choose between them. But we also needed a way to normalize and logically break down the analysis, which we do by breaking the whole country down into 130,000 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre squares. And that not only gives us a spatial unit through which we can apply our hydrological indexing approach, but it also gives us a spatial unit that forms the basis of how we parallelize the analysis that enables us in the scalable cloud computing environment to run NaFRA2 analysis at any scale from local up to national. And I think this two-pronged solution is really emblematic of the key challenge of NaFRA2, which is we don't just need to find solutions that are technically sound, and in particular, technically sound in a way when applied across the whole of England, across data-rich and data-poor areas, and which produce results that are intuitive. But we also need to do that in a way that's computationally feasible to not just produce, but to regularly reproduce at this high 2-meter resolution whilst running nationally. And for example, when the asset performance analysis that Dave was talking about, in some parts of the country, there are 1 kilometre squares whose risk is influenced by hundreds of assets. So when running that fully probabilistic analysis of overtopping and breach risk, applying our indexing and interpolation approach across all those hundreds of data sets simultaneously, we've really had to lean heavily onto the same types of coding approaches that underpin many data science techniques. And this has sometimes taken multiple iterations of refactoring code to optimize it, enough for the analysis just to be practical and applied nationally. And this is where I think our hydroinformatics team has really shone. So they combine the domain knowledge of flood risk and hydraulic modeling with the technology skills of coding and data science. And it's only by seeing both sides of that problem have we been able to solve some of these unique challenges with some really innovative solutions. And for me, that brings to life the true innovation of NaFRA2, which is actually just the skills of the people involved in delivering it across all the teams involved, from Jacobs, JBA, Environment Agency, DEFRA, and beyond. But of course, this first release of NaFRA2 is only the beginning. And this is the foundation for continuous improvement over the next decade. And it feels as though we're just starting to see those potential opportunities for how it could help the Environment Agency and the wider industry. But we really hope that the new public-facing risk information will unlock some of those new opportunities for the industry to find new and innovative ways for that data to support better and better decision-making. So for example, for the first time, we have publicly available risk information for England that includes both depth and climate change information. So I thought on the screen, we've got an example that kind of tries to bring that to life a little bit. So if we look at the risk of flooding from rivers and sea and intersect it with some infrastructure site locations, we can kind of see we get a much higher resolution picture of present day risk than previously available from the EA's national scale data. And this is showing risk of flooding from rivers and sea data. That's that probabilistic representation of residual risk. Looking at the top map, there's one site that's a particular concern because it appears to be at high present day flood risk. And it's got the green circle around it, shown in the darker blue. But at the bottom, you can see with the new climate change data, you see that although the overall flood extent just grows a little, the likelihood of flooding potentially increases significantly. And there are a number of additional sites where I might need to consider future resilience. So if you click, Ben, you should highlight them. There we go. But it might be that these sites are actually designed to be resilient up to a certain depth of flooding, let's say 0.6 of a metre. So with that in mind, I can also use the new NaFRA2 depth information, which is available for both present day and climate change, to see which of my 3 sites might be of particular interest. And of those, one of them is at a high risk of flooding above that critical depth. So I can really start to see how I can use the data available from NaFRA2 to prioritise how when I look at the flood risk to these infrastructure sites. So I thought I'd just finish that with an illustration and then hand over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Joe. Yep. So I'm just going to finish off our presentation today by talking to you about some of the uses of the data, starting with our capital programme. So as you have seen, we now have much richer information around the baseline flood risk to help us target and prioritise investment. But because we now have a better quality modelling overall, it means that we can make decisions based on that at an early stage of scheme design, meaning we have much more of an idea of whether new schemes are feasible before they go on to having any required detailed modelling. Next slide, please. I'm sure that we've got people here from flood risk management authorities. What we've got now is a better understanding of flood risk from different sources, and there's enhanced outputs for surface water, which include climate change, and it should also give you greater consistency in figures for properties at risk across an area. For those of you with interest in planning and permitting, we've got national climate change scenarios available for the first time. There is greater consistency between the flood map from planning and other flood risk data sets, more consistency than there has been in the past. And hopefully the availability of more detailed information and better quality information means that it should be quicker for flood risk assessments to be reviewed. Next slide. You've heard quite a bit about the data already. We've got the improved national mapping products, including climate change, and I'm going to tell you in a sec how you can actually download the components of those models if you want that data. There's more consistent modelling data available using the best available local or national modelling, and that's available through, where appropriate, and licensed that's available through by request. Better quality data, wider range of outputs. For the Environment Agency, it's saving us time and how we collate and process data, and we've got better information about confidence and uncertainty in the outputs as well. For incident management, the modelling information that we have is now more accessible, so we can make better use of it during incidents, a wider range of scenarios, so we can make more informed decisions about specific incident scenarios. More information about flood depths in terms of planning, things like emergency access. During flooding, understanding risks from different sources better. I've already mentioned the consistent figures for properties at risk during an incident, and we've got now these national climate change scenarios. So what I've just described, that's really scratching at the surface of how we'll be using the data and how some of you will be using the data, but hopefully it does give you a flavour of what's possible. Now, if we go on to the last slide, this is how you can find out more. So we have a gov.uk page that gives an overview of NaFRA2 and also NSERM. There is on the data services platform, we've got information around the data that we've published and how to access it, and I think that's readily available is accessed through that platform. And I think there's some questions around supply of data. We are publishing at the moment the data that's makes up the products. We have a huge number of other data sets there, so I'm almost certainly you'll be interested in things that aren't there at the moment, but that will follow later on, but not it's not an immediate priority to publish it there yet. Risk management authorities, we have a SharePoint page for local authorities and other risk management authorities. There's a link which I don't know if you can access it there. If not, hopefully somebody will be able to get a clickable link for you. Just bear with us if you do apply for access through there, because it does have to be manually approved, so there may be a delay of a couple of days if you do look for more information there. And then for spatial planners, there's a web page hosted by the Town and Country Planning Association in partnership with the Environment Agency, and again I think someone's put some links in the chat already for you. Right, we're going to take questions now, but as a reminder, if you can put questions using the Q&A function, and you can also upvote other people's questions there, and please don't raise your hand or use the Zoom chat unless you're having technical difficulties. We're taking questions through the Q&A. Right, and I'll pass back to Ben.
Many thanks all for presenting, and thank you for listening and asking questions as we go along. I will try and parcel out some of these questions to the team, and it's really helpful if you vote for other questions so we can see which are the most popular. So I'm going to start then with the question that Matt Langdon has asked about publishing the reports or detailed methodologies. So what we have published is the overall assessment of flood risk, which is on one of those links that Rebecca just talked about, and Barbara from CIWEM is posting, so you can click on those links. But the detailed methodology is yet to be published. In fact, the way we've organised the NaFRA2 project is to make sure that we get on and publish the data so people can start to use it, and that has meant that finishing off some of the detailed descriptions of the methodology is coming only now. So we're absolutely conscious how many people would value seeing some of that detail, and we will be making sure we can find ways of sharing it, probably through some of those SharePoint sites when the methodology reporting is all neatly finished. So yes, that's on its way. Right, then there's a reference to direct rainfall runoff models, and I wonder, Jake, whether you might take that and perhaps bring in colleagues from JBA if you think that's appropriate.
Yeah, sure. Is this the top question from Oliver?
No, if you look at the open questions, Luke Wally has asked, should site-specific direct rainfall runoff models follow the same methodology as the NaFRA2 methodology?
So to be honest, that's a bit of a policy question. So I'd actually maybe point that towards Shirley. I can say that, yes, that's what we did, and we made a choice to change from hazard. We actually did the original filtering using hazard, and then we changed to depth because we thought it was more appropriate. I wonder if Shirley, you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, happy to do so. So in terms of the methodology for local models, we do still share some advice via SharePoint for RMAs on how to produce local surface water models. We're really keen not to impose a specific methodology because obviously it will vary. What's best will vary from place to place. So we're very keen to make sure that we're giving guidelines. So for example, we do want to make sure that you do assess a range of storm durations, but look at ones appropriate to your site. So we do take account of drainage losses, but exactly how you do that, there are different ways of doing it. So please check out the surface water modelling guidance for LLFAs to check onto that. In terms of the change from using the post-processing using hazard to depth, the reason why we made that change was because we were really missing quite a lot of places which had perhaps 100 to 150 millimeters of water that because they were very slow moving were being post-processed out when we were doing that sort of filtering for the very for shallow depths. So we want to make sure that where we've got water ponding to maybe 100 150 mil, that actually still is coming through now on the modeling. There's no perfect way of doing it. If we leave everything in, then everywhere will be colored blue, and that's not ideal either. But from looking at a lot of examples, we decided that was the best thing to do. But for local models, please provide us, if you want us to include them in the future NaFRA2 updates, please provide them without any post-processing. We'll apply the post-processing to them consistently with everything else. So, that means that they can be used in whatever way the LLFA want to use, and also be processed suitably for use in NaFRA2 as well. So,
thank you, Jane. Thank you, Shirley. I see there are two questions about combined risk and why we publish separate rivers and sea and surface water flooding risk, one from Ben and one from Alistair Dick. I wondered, Dave Allard, are you able to talk a little bit about the separate products that we publish and the potential for providing something combined in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So the question for Alistair looks to be around the risk of flooding to rivers and sea, and it is taking some of that information from the coastal side of things, some from the fluvial side of things, and can we split those out into their sort of constituent sources? So we don't do that within risk of flooding from rivers and sea at the moment, but I think some of the flood zone attributes will show you where that is coming from the fluvial side of things or from the coastal side of things. And I've also mentioned about the one of the layers that went live yesterday on the surface water side of things was a model origin layer, which shows you where the local models have been used and the new national model on the surface water side of things. One of the things we want to do further down the line is think about what we can do in this in terms of the risk of flooding from rivers and sea and the flood zones products. So maybe not split them out as such, but provide more information about where that risk is coming from. And as mentioned, some of it's in the attributes on the flood zones. There's also a couple of other layers on the DEFRA Data Services platform, which show some of the defended, undefended scenarios, and I think they have a bit more metadata associated with them as well, about the source of some of that information. So not quite as you may want, but there is information around it which can help assess that.
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to rattle through a few others. So are there plans to include groundwater flooding? Well, Check Your Long-Term Flood Risk does already include some of the susceptible areas for groundwater flooding from our work on flood warnings for groundwater. But no, we don't. You're right. We don't have a common flood risk assessment framework that includes groundwater at the moment, and we would love to do so. It's on our list for the future, but not something we're working on immediately, given the relatively few locations where groundwater flood risk is in need of improving the way it's presented for the public. But yes, absolutely, we understand that's something for our improvements for the future. Then there's a question here about the various factors that we that determine surface water maps. So I wonder, Shirley, I think you've been involved in some of the previous benchmarking and assessment of these different factors. Would you be able to come in and say a little bit about Oliver's question?
Sorry. Yes, thanks, Ben. Sorry about that. Yes, we've previously looked for what the best values are, the best ways of assessing the parameters here. In terms of the building floor level, actually what's used is a stubby building, simply to make sure that the flows are directed in the right directions around the building. That's not actually used for determining whether or not the property is shown as flooded or not. So that's a sort of a stump just to make sure water reflects the realistic flow paths. In terms of the perimeter flooded, this is something that we've tested previously. We would like to do some more assessment on the way in which we do this post-processing. Would I say it was conservative? I would say not particularly conservative. It's the best that we can do that's realistic. We did test this extensively in our old risk of flooding from surface water maps. So I would say, the really important thing to remember here is that the mapping is not property specific. So the way that we then, kind of show whether a property, the land on which property is located, takes account of the best information that we've got. It's not particularly conservative. It's not, but please do remember it's not property specific. It's looking at areas of land around properties and whether a property is in an area at risk. Happy to discuss that in more detail, but perhaps not right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shirley. I'm going to take a couple more questions, and I'm conscious of time, so we won't probably be able to answer all of them live. But there's a couple of related questions that I'm hoping Dave Allard, you might be able to help with. So Hazel asks about being able to access information on where modelling has come from. And I think there's an anonymous question. Oh, sorry, where have I found it? There was another question which I think relates. Lee P says that asks about the database that tells us which models have been used. So I think this is the model origin layer question, David, for you, if that's okay.
Yes, yeah, thanks for the questions. So for risk of flooding from surface water, I think one of the new layers we published yesterday on the DSP, I think it's called the model origin layer. So that will show you where the new national model has been used and where the local models have been used, and give you a bit of detail about those. That's along similar lines of a product we used. I think it used to be called the model detail layer under the old products. It's along similar lines there. There's not a similar product yet for the rivers and sea or the flood zones, although we are looking to see what we can create to make available to share that. Because completely understand that it's really useful information to understand how the product's been created. As mentioned, there's a bit more information sometimes in the attributes of the layers, especially in the flood zones, showing where the giving an idea about which scenario has been used to produce some of those, although it doesn't list which model it's come from or whether it's come from the new national model or a local model. As mentioned, it's one of the things we want to do is make a bit more information available associated with fluvial coastal products about where that data's come from, to help the users understand it and use the data with confidence, really.
Okay, I can see we are going to have to bring the questions to an end, so we'll do our best to take away and have a think about how we can point you in directions that may answer some of your other questions. But I'll pick up a couple. One, there's a few asking for timelines of exactly when we'll be publishing additional types of information. We're not unable to provide those now, so additional information, other scenarios that we've perhaps referred to are will come when we're able to, but our focus at the moment is making sure the products that we've currently published are as good as we can possibly make them. So we're not going to be able to provide a detailed roadmap for exactly what will be published, but you've heard some of the things that we're working on, and if you follow the links that we've shared, you'll find some news as we improve the range of things that we can publish. I will just pick the next one, which is at the top of my list, from Elliot Blount Powell, who asks about some of the layers. I think, Dave, again, you mentioned these layers which are available on the data services platform, defended and undefended model extents. Would you say a little bit about what they may be useful for, please?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Can't see that question in the chat right now, but in terms of those extra layers on the DSP, there's a suite of layers that they were originally put on the flood map for planning back in March when the new information was launched, and on the flood map for planning service at that moment in time, you could select from a few radial buttons which said sort of show the undefended or the defended, show the 100, 200, 1,000, and we had a bit of feedback around those, that it was it made things a bit more complex, and so we've made those the flood map planning service a bit more bit simpler in terms of there's just the flood zones and the climate change layer associated with those now. But those layers that were there, they're still available on the NaFRA DSP for people who did find them useful or who were downloading it and using them. Those layers are still available to download or link to from the NaFRA Data Services platform.
Thank you, Dave, and many thanks for all your questions. I'm conscious that there are other questions, and we all as an industry are getting to grips with the opportunities that the NaFRA2 data provides, as Joe was saying earlier on. So please do take a look at the links that we've provided, have conversations with your local environment agency teams. There's some of the questions that you're asking we are sharing with our teams in the hope that we'll all collectively be able to guide people to the latest information, and we'll continue to listen to your suggestions, and yeah, we will be making improvements over time. Selena, I think that's probably time to draw it to an end so we can fit within our timeline. Do you want to wrap up for us?
Thanks very much, Ben. Really, just to wrap up, say thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Sorry we haven't been able to answer all the questions that you've posed, but as Ben says, please go to the links, or you could contact each of us individually, not each of us, all of us, obviously, but if there's a specific question. Thank you very much for help. Please look at booking more events from CIWEM, and take care. Have a good day. Thank you.